very, very complex issues around customs, around excise duty, around data transfers, etc. And business, which has done a really comprehensive job of looking at what they need to do and trying to react and do it. And a lot of our larger members have spent millions and millions of euro in actually preparing for contingency plans for the UK leaving. And at the same time, we know that we have tens of thousands of companies who can simply not prepare for such an event. SMEs who don't have the resources, either from a personnel point of view or from a financial point of view, to prepare for something that they're not absolutely sure of what is happening. And that is one of the critical complications here, is that we don't have certainty about how the UK are going to leave, what the new arrangements are going to be, what the new regulatory environment will look like. And so you're saying to small companies, you must prepare for something, but we actually can't tell you exactly what you're preparing for. And so SMEs in Ireland and SMEs, we have tens of thousands of SMEs who currently trade with the UK and have never traded outside the European Union. So this trading outside of the European Union is going to be a totally new experience to them. We know that in the UK there are hundreds of thousands of SMEs in that particular situation. And when you multiply that across Europe, you're talking about potentially millions of companies. So the idea that you could have a no-deal exit is unthinkable. And we have been saying that for many months now. IBEC has been saying, even in a no-deal exit, you cannot have a cliff edge. You have to have some sort of transition period, some sort of arrangement which enables businesses to prepare for a new environment. And that's what we do. We represent business. And we know that business in Northern Ireland, farmers in Northern Ireland, and many of the people in Northern Ireland accept the backstop works for them. And they don't want a hard exit. They don't want a cliff edge exit. And the same business in the UK don't want a cliff edge exit. And business in Germany and France, etc., they don't want a cliff edge exit. So we have to find a new way through. And despite the best contingency planning, authorities can't be fully prepared for the scale of the change that's going to happen with this. So then you're down to the third vote, or potentially third vote in the UK Parliament, and that's for an extension. And this is where we hold a slightly different view well, I'm not really sure. I don't know how John actually defines short. I mean, 10 years would be long. Maybe 2 years would be short. So, but I'm not trying to interpret what John means by short. But in our view, 2 or 3 months, and we understand that the complications of the European Parliament situation, and we've discussed that with the European Parliament, and we've discussed it with the Commission's task force and the Irish government. But an extension of 2 to 3 months is too short. And all that will really do, it'll be a very, very limited benefit to business. It puts off an immediate cliff edge, but in effect it just creates a cliff edge in 2 or 3 months. And that, in our view, we can't envisage a plan in the UK which would resolve a situation which has been going on, as you said, Heather, for 3 years and hasn't reached agreement. And we don't believe that the UK Parliament is clear in its own mind about what it actually wants. And therefore, our view is that an extension should be for a much longer period of time and should be maybe 18 months or 2 years to enable a new political resolution to the problem in the UK. So that's our position, and I'm very happy to answer any questions and have further discussion. So thanks very much.
I was going to ask, Pat, are you sticking with the 2 years or the 10-year time frame?
Well, in reality, I mean, the 2 years is an extension of the process. But the only thing that will really resolve this is a future relationship. And all of us here know something about negotiating trade agreements. And negotiating trade agreements, quick is about 4 years. And most trade associations take much longer to negotiate than that. So something between 2 and 10 is probably where you're going to land before you have an actual new relationship negotiated between the UK and the EU. Because when you look at the complexity of the issues that are being dealt with, and everything that you have to be, for example, an adequacy agreement on data transfer, you're going into all different sectors, and you're looking at, what are you going to agree at sectoral level, and what are you going to agree at horizontal level. I mean, your own experiences of negotiating, for example, the USMCA is, that's not a fast process, and you're updating an existing trade agreement. So our belief is that the close alignment between the UK and the EU is necessary for a number of years in order to give the space to talk about that new relationship and how it's going to work out.
Marjorie, as we've heard, obviously American companies have a foot in all of these camps, including in the European Union ones. So very interested in your sense of where the American business community is falling in this debate and thinking about how to handle the hopefully not catastrophic cliff edge.
Thanks, Lisa. First, let me start by thanking Ken and the terrific WIDA team for inviting me to join you again. It's always a pleasure to see a full room at WIDA events and to have a role in putting on these high-quality panels. I also have to give my hats off to Lisa for being probably the best ever moderator in terms of being able to introduce people without reading their bios, just like this. So, nicely done. Set the gold standard. And of course, it's a pleasure to be here with my fellow panelists. Look, business the world over craves certainty and clarity. And if there are two things that have been in short supply since the 2016 referendum, it has been certainty and clarity. That's something, as you've heard, that's not unique, certainly to American business. It's what's felt in Irish business, British business, and of course, everywhere on the continent. So, like our friends at CBI and IBEC, forgive me, I'm getting a little cold. If in a perfect world, if the UK were going to have a referendum as it did, we would have preferred that the result go the other way. It didn't. We respect that decision. So since 2016, our objective has been to see as smooth a glide path as possible to exit with a sufficient amount of time for business to transition from the current relationship into whatever the terms of the new relationship would be, and to allow us to maintain as close a relationship as possible. Now, it goes without saying that whatever relationship we are able to forge with the UK going forward, it will be by definition less frictionless than the current arrangement that we have. I want to step back for just a minute, though, and put in context the size of the US-UK commercial relationship. We are each other's single largest investors. Between us, we have invested more than, I want to say, nearly $1.3 trillion, $750 billion in US investment in the UK, and 540 going the other way. We have a $230 billion volume of two-way trade. These are 2017 statistics. I'm happy to report for the U.S. There's, at least for people who are up the street, there's a slight surplus on both goods and services for the U.S. So maybe that's one thing the U.K. doesn't have to worry about. On goods, the U.K. is our 5th largest export market and our 7th largest import supplier. Because of the tremendous amount of investments that the UK and US companies have made in each economy, we also have about $1.2 trillion in affiliate sales on an annual basis, and we are talking about 2.8 million jobs, direct jobs between the US and the UK. That doesn't include indirect jobs. That's just direct jobs associated with those investments. Look, the relationship between the U.S. and the U.K. Won't disintegrate overnight. It's important to recognize, though, that many American companies decided to invest in the UK a long time ago as a gateway into the European Economic Community, now of course the European Union. And I think the numbers are roughly that the UK population-wise represents about 15% of the European Union. So if suddenly overnight 85% of your market disappears, or you have less frictionless access to that market, you're necessarily going to be thinking about things a little bit differently. Now, does this mean that American companies are going to pick up stakes and move whole cloth onto the continent or to Ireland? And the answer is no. But having said that, it is the case, there's no question about it, that Ireland in particular, but certainly other countries on the continent have been doing their best to woo American investors. For some companies, for example in the financial services field, what had been a convenient relationship of being able to headquarter themselves in the UK and then passport their services onto the continent, with that passporting going away, they have to have people in Ireland and on the continent in order to conduct their business. So they are moving people. Other companies have withheld additional investments in the UK pending further clarity on which way this is going to go. I think it's fair to say that, I haven't polled my members, but my impression from talking to many of them is that there's no question that future investment decisions will be colored by how this plays out. There's just no doubt about that. In terms of contingency planning, Pat talked about that, and I think John did as well. American companies have been doing contingency planning around the referendum, around Brexit since the referendum. Some sectors have been further ahead. I mentioned this financial services sector because they are in a somewhat unique circumstance as far as how they can do business in Europe. So they got their act together on contingency plans fairly quickly. Other sectors followed suit, in part because of supply chain considerations. For some companies, you face a situation where you may have manufacturing in the UK or on the continent, but there is a flow of parts and services back and forth. And if you find yourself suddenly facing a trade regime where you've got new tariffs and things like that, that's going to add cost. And that's not something that American business is shouldering a lot of extra tariff-related costs these days, and that's just not something we're really keen about. So, the commercial relationship will definitely change. Will it disappear? No. Will it be better? Probably not. Even when the time comes, as it will have to come, to negotiate a U.S.-UK agreement, once we know the shape of the future U.S.-EU trade relationship, the reality is that we are talking about a different type of relationship. Now, the good news is, on the one hand, American companies look at the future UK-EU relationship and say, look, we want, as the negotiations go forward, and we assume they will, because we assume at some point the UK will leave the EU, but that's just today's assumption. We want them to negotiate a future arrangement that is as close to today's arrangement as possible, again, to minimize that friction. That means, in many respects, hewing as closely as possible to the European rule book. So that's fine. That helps maintain that sort of, as close to friction-free trade as possible. But what that also means is that the UK will continue to hew very closely from a standards and regulatory perspective to the UK, to the EU. And the question is that in every instance in the best interest of American industry? And the answer is maybe not. There may be instances, there may be sectors where finding closer alignment between the US and UK economies makes more sense. The fact that both of our economies are 80% driven by services suggests that there may be an opportunity for the US and UK to work together to help drive the global dialogue about rules of the road, expanding the rules of the road for trading services. So there are opportunities, but there are costs. I was on a panel recently in Cambridge and described Brexit as sort of a lose-lose-lose situation. And indeed, I think it is. It's a losing situation for the UK, it's a losing situation for Europe. Europe is losing the country that accounts for, I think it's something like 25% of its defense expenditure. One of only two countries that holds a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, a country of significant heft. And it's a lose situation for the US, not just in terms of business per se, but also because, well, we lose what I would describe as sort of a pro-market, light regulatory touch voice at the European decision-making table. I had the good fortune to be in Dublin last week, and we were talking about the stepped-up role that Ireland will now play in the transatlantic relationship, because the UK is in effect stepping away from that table. So we will look to countries like Ireland to bring that pro-growth voice to the table and push back on what may be more heavy-handed proposals that we'll see from the next commission. So on balance, not a great opportunity for American companies, Brexit. Well, I should say there's probably two ways in which Brexit turns out to be good for business. One is for those companies who work with small and medium-sized enterprises who don't themselves have the capacity to actually deal with complex customs requirements and things like that. If suddenly you're facing these new barriers doing business in the UK, you've got more business potentially, right? Helping those small and medium-sized enterprises. It also hasn't been bad business for me because we were able to set up the US-UK Business Council in 2017. And with companies like Dow, we've been trying to provide that platform for American companies to have a voice into this whole process. So on balance, I would say we are worried about the lack of clarity and certainty. I agree with Heather. We could look at sort of the Twitter or the FT Live flow on an hourly basis and have to adjust our expectations. It is critically important, I think, for business voices on both sides of the Atlantic to be unified in the messages that we're conveying to business, not just that we're conveying to government, not just in the UK, but also on the continent. And we will continue to do that. But it's not a happy circumstance for American companies. That there's just no two ways about it.